Today on the Best of Oklahoma Gardening, we toast to a new year as we take a look back at our Garden to Glass series by revisiting Iron Monk to learn more about the hops beer brewing process. I'll share with you about the gray owl juniper plant. Then we head to WanderFolk to learn about the botanicals infused in their distilling process. Underwriting assistance for our program is provided by the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing.
So if you're looking for an easy, low-maintenance perennial, have two different types of flowers on one plant. Capsaicinoids that gives the pepper its heat. Over this season, we've been talking a lot about growing hops out in the garden, but today we are looking at what you do with those hops. And we are here at Iron Monk in Stillwater, and joining me is Iron Monk's head brewer, Trenton Inselman. Trenton, thanks for sharing this. I mean, I'm excited to learn a little bit more about this process. So Tell me a little bit how we go from something that's out in the field that I know about to this to then I can.
Yeah, so our process is a fairly lengthy multi-step process, but we do every bit of the actual beer making process in one day. And then the yeast is our friend, and he'll take us the rest of the way and get us our beer, which takes, for our typical beers, about 14 days.
Okay.
So we start with our malted germinated grains. For us, we get most of them from Germany, Belgium, different places like that, and malting facilities that have been there for hundreds of years.
And when you say germinated grains, we're not talking about hops yet. We're talking about the wheat, barley, rye, I'm assuming? Okay.
Yep, so all of our grains, it kind of depends on the style. We have wheat malt, we have rye malt, we have a pale malt, which is what our typical base is that we use in about every beer. We have Pilsner malts and Vienna malts that do different things and give you different beers and create different characteristics that you ultimately find in different styles of beers. Your colors come from different roasts and different caramelizations of the germination process.
Okay.
And so that's where we start, is with a recipe with our grains, and then we go from there. So,
and they're actually germinated seeds?
Yeah,
okay.
So the seeds, they go through a malting process, huge malting facilities that those companies have. They'll actually get the grains wet to start, so they'll start to grow their seed and kind of pack all their starches and sugars. They'll dry them out, bag them, send them to us, so we get all that sugar is what we're ultimately after in our process.
Okay.
And so grain is one of the main components in our beer making process. We have our recipes, and then we have what we call our mill room, where we have a mill and a giant auger, and we'll mill our grains. They'll go up through our hopper, and it's a gravity-fed system where we'll put 12 to 1,800 pounds of grain. At that point, it's called grist. It's been cracked. It's ready to be added to water, where that sugar can come out in solution. So that first step involves a machine called our mash tun. Our mash tun is where we'll actually hydrate that grist, put it back into warm water. So our temperature matters at this point.
So that grist is like a powder, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so it's a little, not quite as fine as just a pure flour or a pure powder. There's still some grain and some material there.
Okay.
So too fine actually would help your efficiency, but it's going to hurt your machine. You're going to get all powder, and it's no fun. It
gets clogged up. Okay.
Yeah, we get what's called a stuck mash, and that'll take hours. So we like that perfect
Nobody
balance.
wants a stuck mash.
Exactly. Yes, it makes a long day longer. We want to mash at a certain temperature where those processes can act and do their best work, and that's going to matter with efficiency. We let that get full with all of our grain, and there's rakes that spin and get everything stirred up and nicely mixed up in that mash tun.
So it's basically like brewing, kind of, right?
Yeah.
Like literally you're just letting it marinate in there.
And then we're going to let it set for an hour.
Okay.
An hour is about the perfect time for all those chemical processes to take place. All of those sugars have been converted. to the starches that we need in our next processes. So all the things that need to happen at that point have happened. And then we do what's called lauter. Everything we do essentially is a German term.
I was going to say, you have different terms for everything,
so it just means transfer or move.
Okay.
So we're going to move our liquid, which at this point is called wort, W-O-R-T, to sugar water.
Okay.
And we move it into our brew kettle. We have a 43-ish barrel brew kettle, which is fairly large. A barrel of beer is 31 gallons.
Wow.
So we can produce quite a bit of liquid in a day. We get there.
Y'all have one of the largest, right, in the state?
We do have one of the larger brew houses in the state. Okay. It's good and bad. So it requires, every time we brew, we have to brew a lot of beer. Mm-hmm. So when you want to do a beer for a friend's bike race, it requires a little more nuance and a little more challenge, because you don't quite need that 40 barrels of beer for a weekend. So it allows us to produce a lot and to stay ahead of production, but it also provides its own challenges in not being able to do as limited of releases as maybe some other breweries do. But we'll fill our kettle with our wort and we'll boil it. So the boil is going to last an hour, and that's, again, similar brewing industry. It's just standard. As soon as the boil starts, if you want your beer to have, and it depends on what bittering agent you want. So this is where our hops are first introduced.
Okay.
Once we're full and our wort is in our kettle, that's where we're gonna add our hops. Different stages in the boil create different enzyme reactions and different chemical processes, which creates different levels of bitterness.
Right.
At the very end of the boil, we typically add a flame out hop, which is going to give us most of our characteristics. That is the last hop addition we use for almost all of our beers, except for our IPAs, where we'll do what's called dry hopping, and that happens in the fermenter at the end of fermentation.
So tell us a little bit about that fermentation.
Yeah, so fermentation, at the end of our boil, what's called knockout, we knock our wort out into a fermenter. We have 12 fermenters here in the brewery, and those we use as dual process tanks. So we use them both for fermentation and for finished product. We'll add our yeast day of brewing. Once we get to our appropriate temperature where the yeast is going to do its best, we'll blast in our yeast. We do it in line during transfer. Two different ways. We either use fresh yeast, which just comes out of a packet, we rehydrate it, shoot it in, or we'll use yeast off of a different tank where that beer is already fermented, its yeast is still viable, and we'll actually collect that yeast and use it in a different beer.
So yeast is a microorganism, and it just wants to eat the sugar water, right?
Yes, and it lasts a long time. So we'll typically get 8 to 10 beers out of a single pitch of yeast.
Okay.
And so we'll use 3 little bags of yeast, and then they'll last us for 10, sometimes 10 beers, which I brew about every week, so it'll last us about 10 weeks.
Okay.
Really cool way to save money, and also that yeast is more viable. There's a whole lot more cells now because they reproduce and they go crazy in there. So when we reuse it, it kicks fermentation off faster, and we actually ferment a little faster.
Oh, okay. So what is the yeast actually doing in there?
Yeah, so the yeast is eating the sugar that we created from our grains, and it's turning our sugar water into alcohol, producing both alcohol, which is what we want, which is what's turning us into beer. And then they have CO2 as an off gas. And in all of our tanks, we have a blow-off arm where we'll put a hose in a bucket of water and actually watch that CO2 bubble out. Okay. And we know that sugar is being consumed by the yeast. Once that slows down, we know that we've essentially eaten all the sugar we can, and our beer's pretty well finished.
Oh, okay.
At that stage, we'll drop our temperature. We typically drop our temperature down to about 29 degrees, and that allows for flocculation of all the yeast and any matter that's in the beer. It'll fall out of solution. Our fermenters are conical shaped, so there's a cone at the bottom, and that allows all the yeast and anything in there to fall into that cone, where we can actually get the yeast out and save our beer. We actually do that backwards. We take our beer off the yeast, but we still do drain the yeast. Once our beer's finished at 29 degrees and everything's done.
Is it ready?
We're really close. So the only thing we lack at this point is carbonation.
Oh, okay.
We'll transfer it to a second fermenter. And at this point, we have only beer. We've left the yeast in the tank. We'll end up draining it off and washing that original tank. Our second tank, we have what's called the carb stone, and it really is a piece of metal in the tank that we shoot CO2 direct carbonation into the beer. Has tiny little holes, and
it's like
those
one
holes.
Of those air stones in the aquariums. Right?
Yeah, it looks very similar. We just blast CO2, and it does what you'd see in a fish tank, and it just percolates up to the top, all these little bubbles.
So after you take the CO2 out of it, you're putting CO2 back into it. Okay.
Yeah. You can actually self-carbonate the beer with its own blow-off. It's tricky in what stage you stop letting the CO2 out and it stays in the tank.
So this is more of a controlled method to do
This
that.
is a lot easier, so you don't have to worry about high pressure in different stages of the process. So simplest way is to let it finish. We add our own CO2 back. Once we've hit our carbonation, the beer is completely finished and ready to drink. At that point, we typically can very quickly. We have a very large canning line, a 6-head fill canning line. That's where we kind of make the fun. I mean, that's the fun part really, is you get to take the beer out of the tank where you can't see it into a can that you can hold and drink and sell and enjoy.
Well, yeah, I mean, y'all are everywhere now. In the grocery stores, you don't just have to be here in Stillwater at the brewery to get it anymore. So, and even at our stadium, actually.
So we are lucky to have a strong distribution channel. We distribute statewide through 5 or 6 different distributors. They come pick up our product in 2 different ways. They pick up kegs and cans. We are statewide with both of those. So we sell a lot of cans, which are a fun way to showcase your product because you get to have fun artwork. And for us, we get to put Pistol Pete on a can, which is really cool. And then in a keg, which we have cool tap handles, and you'll see those in restaurants and bars across the state. So it's pretty cool to finally get to that stage where the beer's done. And that whole process takes about 14 days.
Well, Trenton, thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about this and showing us how we go from the garden to the glass with
Absolutely.
hops. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much. Junipers come in all shapes and sizes. In fact, you can get some that are well over 18 feet tall and some that are under 18 inches tall. This is why when you're selecting an evergreen juniper to plant in your landscape, you want to make sure you're getting one that is appropriate for the size that you have to allow it to grow. Because if you get the wrong one, then that can be a problem later on. The one we want to talk to you today about is called the gray owl juniper. Now, this is actually a cultivar of our native eastern red cedar. So its genus species is actually Juniperus virginiana. However, it is a selected cultivar, again, called gray owl, meaning that it's going to stay relatively short. You can see it will really max out about a height of 3 feet, but its spread is going to get up to about 6 feet in diameter. So the nice thing about this is it really creates a low-growing evergreen buffer if you're looking to add that into your landscape or something maybe on the forefront of some wooded areas. Now, the other thing you might notice is the color is a little bit different than our typical junipers. And so gray owl does offer this nice blue-green foliage. It's a consistent color that you're going to get. Now, it is similar to our native because of the fact that it is dioecious. So you can see that this is a female plant as it has these nice kind of blue berries that are produced on it that birds often like. Also, like our native eastern red cedars, this is very well adapted for our climates as it's hardy from zone 4 to 9. So we're right in the middle of that. And the other thing is it can really handle our soil. So whether you're on eastern or western Oklahoma, it can handle both really dry drought conditions once it's established, as well as some moist conditions. Now, the one thing is you don't want to put it anywhere where it's going to be in standing water, because that it does not prefer, and it will not thrive in that location. But this is just one example of junipers, and there's many of them out there, on finding the right plant for the right place. As we continue our series From Garden to Glass, we are in downtown Guthrie to visit the state's first distiller to learn how WanderFolk is adding botanicals into their liquor. Hello, Jeffrey.
Hello.
So I hear you're the head distiller and head of spirits here. Maybe you can help me understand a little bit about some of the products that y'all supply and the botanicals that go into them.
I'd love to.
So tell me first what you guys do here at WanderFolk.
Well, here at WanderFolk, we distill. We are a distillery first and foremost. So distilling, you're making ethanol, right? So ethanol-based beverages like your vodka and gin, various types of whiskey. Basically, here in Oklahoma, we make anything we can from grain.
Okay.
Yep.
And you're making some of that from Oklahoma grain, or?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So we use rye sourced from here in Oklahoma, as well as barley right now, and also some corn.
Okay, very good. So you also, what really brought us here was the fact that you're infusing botanicals into some of your liquors. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Totally, yeah. So as a matter of course for a distillery, we have to make money, and so we need to sell things that don't take a lot of time to rest. Like a whiskey takes years and years and years, and so in the meantime, what we like to do is sell products that don't require aging, such as vodka. Okay. But we also make gin, as you alluded to. So gin does require some botanicals to give it some flavor, some character in a house style. So we have various botanicals that we use, and the types of gin that we make are classic, and then modern styles as well. And then training, like the education is the best in the world that we can get. So
awesome.
Yeah.
So I know I always thought gin comes from juniper and vodka comes from potatoes. Is that true or not?
So yes, you are required to use juniper in gin. So if you don't like juniper, gin you might have trouble with. But on vodka, no, you don't have to use potatoes. That's probably a great marketing campaign from somebody in Eastern Europe. But vodka can be made from anything. So our vodka is made from 100% corn. Obviously, that's a staple crop for the United States, so it makes sense. But it can be made from anything from fruit or any other type of grain. And then juniper, gin, as you alluded to, has to be made from juniper. But we can also throw in some other botanicals. And so the juniper can be a huge part of that ingredient list, or it can be reduced to just a small portion, and then you can throw all these other botanicals in there, maybe a lot of citrus or floral aspects. Things to almost go with the juniper that might make it taste almost not like juniper at all. Okay,
so and all of those go through the same kind of distilling process that beer goes through initially, is that correct? Or
so beer doesn't get distilled, beer is fermented.
Okay, sorry.
But distillates are also fermented just like beer is.
Okay.
So all distillates start out as a beer or a wine in the instance of brandy, right?
Okay.
So we just want a sugar source. We're going to throw some yeast at it. The yeast eats the sugar, and you have alcohol, CO2, and heat as a byproduct. And as distillers, our job is to concentrate those ethanols, that alcohol, and separate it away from the solids and the color. And so what we're doing is in distilling, just in a very, very brief synopsis here, we take beer, we put it into a pot, we heat it up, and then we collect the hot vapor that is expelled, similar to like a tea kettle ejecting steam out of the little whistle.
Okay.
We collect the steam, and we allow it to condense into a liquid, which is a higher concentration of ethanol and some flavor.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so then at what point do the botanicals go into this process?
So after we do that first distillation where all the grain and everything is separated from the actual concentrated alcohol, we'll take the alcohol and blend it with some botanicals at about it'll be like a 50% alcohol, 50% water. And then we'll actually put the botanicals, allow them to steep for about 24 hours, and then we'll redistill that again. And so you're essentially making essential oils that are solved or they're with an ethanol solvent.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So there's a whole recipe, I would imagine, just with the botanicals. Walk us through that process of how you came up with some of your different recipes.
You got it. So as we said earlier, gin, you have to use juniper. And so it was only a question of how much juniper do we want to use and at what part of the process in distilling do we want to add the juniper. And so we throw the juniper into the recipe. We'll say for Garden Society, right? For Garden Society gin, we wanted to make an American style gin, or what we call a contemporary gin, something that's not as in your face with the juniper. So we reduced the juniper to about 10% of the total ingredients list. And I wanted to throw some things in there that I really kind of personally liked. So I like black pepper in my distillate. And so I found a pepper. It's grown in Tasmania. It's called mountain pepper. It's very, very interesting. It's not been used in distillates that I know of. We had to get FDA approval to actually use it even.
Does it smell? Can I smell it?
It does. But actually you might want to crush it up a little bit to actually get a really nice smell. And I'm going to grab a couple others here too.
But it just looks like peppercorns, so.
Yeah. So in Tasmania, this is almost like a black pepper substitute for them. We don't think it's cultivated. I'm pretty sure it's all harvested wild. Right now, I don't know that it's even been attempted to cultivate it.
Okay.
But also, we use some citrus notes. So for our citrus, we wanted to use orange peel, lemon peel, and yuzu powder.
Okay. Yuzu powder. Is that what this is here?
Yeah. So you can see these are dried peels of lemon and orange. And then this is a powdered peel of yuzu. And yuzu is like a Japanese citrus. So it has a nice floral note to it. I don't really know how to describe it. It just smells like dessert. It smells like a lemon bar. It's really, really nice.
Yeah, it has kind of a lemon cake smell to it or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, orange and lemon. So all three of those make this really nice example of citrus in the gin. And that's the Garden Society gin is a very citrusy gin.
Okay.
And then we'll also use, I forgot to mention this earlier, but this is actually lavender that was harvested and grown here in Oklahoma. So this lavender this is this year's crop. So this comes from the Pauls Valley area. Really, really nice stuff.
Very nice, yeah.
So the floral, the citrus, the pepper, in with your traditional gin flavor, that's really what makes Garden Society.
Okay.
That's that style, if that makes sense.
So kind of a fresh summer flavor, I would think, with all the citrus.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's not as much baking spice in that one.
Right.
But the other gin that we make, I'm going to set these to the side if that's okay. So the other gin we make is called Prairie Wolf. And so we've been making Prairie Wolf for 10 years. This has been something that we've been producing for quite some time. But this one was actually recently adjusted. The botanicals were adjusted. We included an additional baking spice element. So this is more of like a traditional, a lot of juniper in there, but the juniper is it's the best juniper we can buy in the world. It's from northern Italy, from Tuscany. We use cardamom. If you're familiar with cardamom, it's got this really nice light menthol note to it. And then coriander, tons and tons of coriander. So for a coriander citrus note. And then licorice root and angelica root.
So a little more hit you.
Yeah.
Your flavors.
Yeah, a little bit more punchy. But yeah, the juniper berries, which I haven't brought it down yet, and I don't know why, but these juniper berries, I mean, what you're looking for is for juniper berries, you want consistency of color, which we have throughout the batch here. And then we're looking for them to just kind of break apart really easily with your fingers. And on the inside, you can see there's a little bit of a shiny sap substance. That tells you have a good moisture content. They were picked fairly freshly. That's what you have to have for good.
So that's the oils in there that are going to be steeped out and then distilled out.
Totally, yeah. Okay. So you are making basically like alcohol essential oils. So it's almost like a perfume you can drink.
Okay. Well, and do you have a third one?
Oh yeah. So we also, for the folks that aren't super into juniper, I made this gin that's not a gin.
Okay.
So there's no juniper was harmed in the making of this. But we use California lime peel, a lot of this Tasmanian pepperberry again, and then lemon verbena, which I'm sure you're familiar with lemon verbena. But it's one of my favorite things to distill with. It really doesn't take much. And I mean, who?
So it's the leaves that you're using.
Yeah, it's just the leaves. Yeah. It's one of my favorite things. Anyway, so very, very simple recipe for this, and it's fantastic. It goes any cocktail you would put gin in, you can just replace it with this.
Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for sharing this with us. I think it's fascinating how you're using Oklahoma products through the fermentation and this distilling to create an Oklahoma product right here in Guthrie. Thank you all for sharing this with us.
Thanks for coming and visiting.
Next week on the Best of Oklahoma Gardening, we are talking tools and soil as we begin to look towards the next gardening season.
Here at Iron Monk, just getting some video.
And the other thing too is that soil.
To find out more information about show topics as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure to visit our website at oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. Join in on Facebook and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. Tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater gem. We would like to thank our generous underwriter, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is also provided by Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Oklahoma Horticulture Society, the Tulsa Garden Club, and the Tulsa Garden Center.